Hi, and welcome everyone. We're happy today to present a Microsoft Purview eDiscovery walkthrough. I'm Heather Eckman with Microsoft, and I have Jeff Hayes here with me today. We'll do some introductions, but this is a discussion about how cloud and AI is going to or has shaped the eDiscovery landscape. And we'll talk about this in the context of M365 and eDiscovery. This session today is hosted by Netrix as well as Microsoft. So our agenda for the next hour is Jeff and I will just give some quick introductions so you know who you're talking to. We'll talk a little bit about the new eDiscovery reality, how cloud and AI has shaped eDiscovery. We'll look at some of the legal risks and challenges, especially with the velocity of AI development. And we'll talk a little bit about key considerations for eDiscovery and M365, and then we'll look at some of the features and functionality inside of Purview eDiscovery, and then we'll wrap up with Q&A. As well as just some key takeaways. So feel free to drop questions in the chat, and at the end during the Q&A, we'll answer as many as we can. So Jeff, do you want to do a quick intro?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Heather. So my name is Jeffrey Hayes. I am a principal solution architect here at Netrix. I work within the Microsoft security and compliance areas where I help customers, clients design, implement, and deploy Microsoft Purview, and as well as other security solutions. So looking forward to providing some information today around what Purview and eDiscovery can do, specifically in how things tie together. So Heather?
Thanks, Jeff. My name is Heather Eckman. I am a senior data security solution engineer at Microsoft. No, my title just says solution engineer here. Data security, adding that in makes it super long, but my focus is on the Purview side of the M365 stack. So focusing on data security, retention, eDiscovery. I have a background in eDiscovery for many, many years, certified eDiscovery specialist, and now with AI, a focus on AI risk and governance. So happy to be talking to everyone today. And I think what we're going to do is just jump right in and look at some of the realities, how things have changed with eDiscovery now that we are in this AI phase. We talk about cloud as well, and I do think the two definitely go hand in hand. I'm sure everyone on this call has their own thoughts and opinions about AI. Everybody is using it or discussing it, but it is something that is transformational in so many different ways. I'm sure everybody during COVID started using Teams, but what we're seeing because of that, because of more data being migrated to the cloud and the use of AI, data is now more distributed. So people are no longer working in a place of, sending documents back and forth over email. It's distributed across not just one environment, but multiple environments. Those environments are continuously updated, and we're running into some new challenges with figuring out where data lives, what applications are using what data. Now with agents coming along, how are those agents used? Who's building them? Who's accessing them? And then we're looking at, some issues or some challenges around understanding ownership as well as collaboration. And as this tech continues to develop, continues to move forward as more organizations really get a handle on their AI governance, this is just going to increase exponentially. So it's a really great opportunity to, get a good grasp on what your organization is doing, understanding the systems that are being used, the environments that are being used, as well as how they're being updated. Because of this, we're seeing a lot of data sprawl and a lot of discussions around how to manage and map custodians. So this is something that's definitely coming up with organizations looking at building agents, how they want to build agents, what they want to use it for, who is responsible for building and managing. It's just creating a lot of data just across all of the various environments. We'll talk a little bit about where Copilot data lives, but it goes towards data is always going to be growing, and even more so now. We're seeing conversations and chats just span, over multiple organizations, and that work spanning over, again, multiple environments. So shared channels, shared groups are used for collaboration. So instead of just emailing documents back and forth, a lot of data is being put in those collaboration sites. And even setting this up, Jeff and I work for different organizations, and we use collaboration spaces instead of emailing back and forth. So those are all things to be taken into consideration. On top of, as new data is created, again, where is it stored? If something is created in Copilot, a new document is created in Copilot, where is that stored? Who has access to it? Is that being considered in retention policies? And then, since we have this collaborative environment, we're also running into how do you map the custodians and the players in litigation and investigations back to that. So what we're seeing is discovery, and I took out the E here, is definitely a lot more collaborative now. And we need to make adjustments. So instead of, here's a list of key custodians, let's put their email and OneDrive on hold. Now we have to look at, where does data live? What is the intention? How are we going to collect that data? And balance out the cost of review with the cost of over collection or potentially missing data. We're also seeing the need for more cross collaboration between teams. And we'll talk about this a little bit more as we go through the next couple of slides. So this slide, we're really looking at legal risk and cost that is associated with the evolution of cloud and AI. I am not an attorney, so I'm not going to dive deep into case law and from the legal perspective, but I will tell you some of the things that I have been seeing, especially working with some US-based banks that are really in a position where they're doing some great things with AI, and they're also exploring what to do next. So, we're definitely seeing more case law out there. I'm sure everybody's following along with the AI case law, but there's still some uncertainty. There's not a lot of case law, even though it's coming along, but there's a lot of discussion around data that's created from AI or an agent. Would an agent be considered an owner? We talk at Microsoft a lot about agents sitting within an organizational structure. So basically like a worker, a person. So that agent isn't a person. So how do we handle data that is created from that agent? And that brings up that authorship, metadata, ownership, and explainability on the AI side. So understanding how data is being used, how the model is working, and being able to explain that whole AI process. And it is something that we are starting to see come up more and more just in conversations from opposing counsel, courts. So just something to be aware of there. And, this is going to, if it hasn't already, cause some rising costs for discovery. So again, much more complex because you're no longer looking at just email and OneDrive, or even email, OneDrive, SharePoint, and Teams. Those might be the location where things are stored. But again, now you're looking at who's using the data, what's the intention, how it's being used. So it may take a lot more upfront kind of investigation and understanding, and that's going to cost more money. We'll see more data that needs to be processed, whether that's through searches being run in M365 or whether that's downstream processing and review. I know there's a lot out there around using AI for review, and I've seen different case studies out there where it can reduce the cost. I've also seen people questioning, like, where is that line between, efficiency and cost? And we went through this when predictive coding first came out. So, I feel like it may increase the cost, but I think there's a little bit of that just kind of experimentation. And then a lot of the manual workflows that have been used no longer apply. So we really need to look at, understanding what is inside of your environment, what is reasonable, what is necessary to collect, go back to proportionality in some cases, and really looking at the processes that you have for eDiscovery. Make sure that your playbooks, your SOPs are up to date and documented. And one thing that I'm definitely seeing here is a need for cross collaboration. So really seeing a mix between IT, GRC, legal, business units, even leadership, all need to come together and understand each other's roles and understand each other's contributions. One thing that I was saying for a while that I think is starting to pass is organizations would want to adopt AI quickly, and they wouldn't involve legal because they just thought legal was going to say no. And by the time they would get down the road enough, legal would find out and they would put a stop to it. And that would just throw off the entire project. So that cross collaboration piece is definitely critical. And then documenting what those technology choices are, what your configuration choices are. Again, having those processes up to date. And one thing, especially with AI, that we hear all the time in the AI governance world is you cannot defend what you cannot explain. So really understanding those AI tools that are out there, understanding the life cycle, all of the documentation. And then on top of that, for those regulations, if you're in the EU or you're in a highly regulated industry, how all of this affects the regulations. So, and I'll go through this one quickly. I talked a lot about this on the previous two slides, but understanding where your data is, where it's stored, how it's retained, the metadata, where that metadata lives, and the behavior of that metadata. So when does it change? When a file is uploaded, when a file is created, where does all of that metadata come from? Also, I think it's really important to look at, and understand as changes come along in M365 or any cloud environment. A lot of times you don't know it until it shows up unless you're tracking it. So understand the changes that are coming on the roadmap. Do a regular review. I put quarterly in here, but whatever works for your organization. Review with legal, IT, and compliance, and then make sure you're testing before you roll out new features. So, and I mentioned it before, but understanding what's discoverable in your tenant ownership, and then just continuing to evolve. So I'm going to turn it over to Jeff for the next part. We're going to jump into Purview, and we're going to start talking a little bit about some strategies in Purview for eDiscovery.
All right, thanks, Heather. So eDiscovery is part of Microsoft Purview, right? It's one of many features or tools within the suite. And in order to have an effective eDiscovery tool to be used, you have to understand how Purview interconnects and how things build on each other as well. So I'm going to spend a few minutes here talking about various components with Purview. I'm not going to get into too far in the weeds here. So, but a couple of things. So, you've got data classification that within Microsoft Purview that feeds into things like sensitivity labeling. Information protection essentially allows you to label documents. define where you might have your sensitive data, right? Apply encryption and security around that. You get into communication compliance to be able to monitor and put compliance around communications going on with your environment, whether it be an email, maybe within Viva Engage or within Teams. Insider risk management allows you to do user behavior monitoring, and that'll pull from sources such as data classification, sensitivity labels, etc. But that also has the potential to feed into investigations that you might leverage eDiscovery for. And then another big feature that is relative today would be your data lifecycle management, retention, and also records management. The two kind of go hand in hand. But this is where you start getting into retention policies, you getting into retention labels, et cetera. And there are some differences and nuances that you need to understand, because what you do in your environment and what you have from a policy standpoint, from a retention policy, is something that you need to understand and have in place, because that is when you're doing eDiscovery, a search, a content search, and you're trying to look for information. You have to know where, what's available to you, not just what's current in your environment, but also, what's been possibly, put on a retention hold from the get-go based on your retention policies. Data lifecycle management, record management allows you to enforce what you are putting down within your policy. It's basically your method of enforcement for your written policies, right? So these are just a couple of features within Purview, that are going to be available for you guys to use, that are going to feed into eDiscovery. We'll touch on a couple of these today, and just and highlight those so you know how they relate to eDiscovery standpoint. Okay. eDiscovery Standard versus eDiscovery Premium, right? So there are a basic set of features that reside within your Microsoft 365 licenses. And when you step up to the advanced license sets like E5 subscriptions, you get additional tool sets that you need to be aware of. So there are things like review sets, advanced indexing. You start getting into additional query and analytics that you can leverage, leveraging AI through Security Copilot. There are additional advanced features that you get with eDiscovery Premium, which is part of your E5 licensing SKUs. So just note that there is a basic level of eDiscovery, and then there's the eDiscovery Premium, which allows you to take advantage of those feature sets. So if you have an E5 license, you are fully licensed, and we'll talk about some of those features as we progress here through some of the slides. So, okay. Okay. First feature I really wanted to jump into here is, let's talk about retention policies. So within data lifecycle management of Purview, there are retention policies. Retention policies target entire repositories. They're not just, it's not item level retention, right? So you put a retention policy around an entire mailbox or an entire SharePoint site or team site, et cetera. And it applies the retention to that entire site. So it's not individual item based, but the entire site is basically put on the same policy. And yes, you can target all mailboxes. You can scope specific mailboxes in the organization, and you can exclude certain mailboxes as well if you're targeting the all. Here, what I did is I wanted to make sure that you can not just target like a group of mailboxes, but you can also do dynamic. You can do a dynamic grouping as well, right? So you can do adaptive scopes. So if you want to group individuals or group people based on maybe department or maybe their user properties, you have the ability to do that, create adaptive scopes, kind of like a dynamic distribution list for email. You can use that for targeting to apply policies to for individuals. And then the primary action is you want to basically kind of define. Do you want to retain items after a specific period is over? Do you want to retain items forever? You want to determine, whether to delete the items post retention or not. So that's the enforcement side of what you would put into your retention policies, right? But what I've got highlighted here these are just some of the key locations that you could apply retention policies to, and I wanted to call out a few. So we've got our Exchange mailboxes. This is probably one of the primary locations because there's underlying items that get put into Exchange, whether you know it or not. We've got SharePoint sites, OneDrive accounts, Microsoft 365 groups and sites. And then we start getting into things like Teams channel messages. We start getting into the collaborative method in terms of what we can put on retention. So if you want to put anywhere from a 1-day retention on Teams chat messages all the way up to a forever policy, you can. You can target individual one-to-one messages. You can target one-to-many messages, or you can target channel threads from a specific team site, right? And then some of the new experiences now, you can actually put Copilot and AI prompts and responses on retention now as well. So so when you're going through and you have to do an eDiscovery search, knowing that if you want to go and do a search based on AI activity, you would now have the capability to, but also knowing how long you retain that for, how far back you want to be able to do that discovery and search is going to be driven by your retention policies here. So again, a key aspect, be aware of what you have in a retention, where it's stored, where you're storing your data, how long you're retaining it for, right? Okay. When you start getting into the records management side, right, and you start getting into retention labels as opposed to policies, the difference between retention labels and policies, the labels target individual item locations. So I can put a label on a individual email message, an individual document, or an individual item within OneDrive, et cetera, right? So it's not just targeting an entire repository, it's targeting individual items where the user can choose to apply labels to those items on an individual basis, or you can even leverage things like auto labeling, right? And it can actually leverage auto labeling to apply based on certain conditions that are met kind of behind the scenes. So again, you can statically assign retention or leverage adaptive scopes, right? That's part of it as well. And then here from a file plan perspective, you can also build categories and you can build subcategories. So if you want to deploy certain retention labels out to specific departments, such as like your finance department has a specific set of labels versus legal versus IT versus HR, et cetera, you can define different categories to pull from, right? And you can then do some kind of manage the file plan and put some organization and some structure around it, right? The more information about retention labels is displayed, the easier it is to sort and find what you're looking for within the file plan as you go forward. So, okay. There are some key principles of retention that you need to be aware of, which comes into play when you're doing eDiscovery, right? So when you have retention policies, retention can be placed in multiples. You can have retention labels in place, you can have retention policies in play. Even there are some other areas within Microsoft 365 that will hold data for periods of time, whether it be in Exchange, SharePoint, et cetera. But there are some key principles that you need to be aware of, right? Number one, retention wins over deletion. If content won't be permanently deleted when there's also retention setting to retain it, i.e., if a user deletes an item from their individual mailbox, it might appear as deleted to the user. It might be invisible from the user, but technically goes into a recoverable state, and it is still available for retention, which means retention is going to win. It's not going to allow it to get deleted. From number two, longest retention period wins, right? So if you've got an item that might be on retention from, say, multiple retention policies, or maybe a retention policy and a retention label, if one has the retention set to hold it for 1 year, one says 3 years, the longer retention period is going to win out. It's going to retain that data for that minimum of 3 year period. Explicit wins over implicit for deletions, right? So if you've got a conflict in how to resolve retention, what happens is a retention label is considered explicit, whereas you get a retention policy, which is more covering the entire mailbox, would be considered an implicit, right? So if you've got conflicting measures there, the explicit policy is going to win out essentially there, as opposed to the general one, right? So, and if for some reason there's still a conflict after those first 3 rules, and when it comes to a deletion period, basically the default is gonna be where it's gonna use the shortest deletion period to win out, right? It's rare that it gets that case, but again, if for some reason it's still in that state, these are the rules of retention, right? So when you have an environment stood up with multiple retention, you have to kind of pay attention to, retention policies, retention labels. You might, like I said, you might have your recycle bin from an exchange. You might have your SharePoint 30-day retention built in there, et cetera. So there are several areas that you have to kind of maintain and understand, and where things might be in retention, how long they're going to get retained for. Because at the end of the day, what you have in retention plus whatever you have currently in your environment is what you're going to be using for when you're doing eDiscovery. That's what's available to you when you target your custodians, target your data sources, right? Okay. So when you want to search for data within eDiscovery, right? There's the search can be done through a number of those. You've got content searches, which allow you to locate data across multiple Microsoft 365 sources. You can target SharePoint online sites, OneDrive sites. You can target team sites are back-ended by that as well, right? You got Teams chat information. You've got AI prompts, et cetera. You also have your Exchange mailboxes, right? From within there, you can actually build conditions and how to do queries based off of keywords, based off of conditions. But at the end of the day, when you start an eDiscovery case, a lot of stuff starts with the search, right? You're gonna define your data sources. You're gonna do a search, and what's going to be available to you is going to be available based on what's in combination current plus what's in retention. When you're doing a search, there are you've got also the ability to put things on legal hold. So once you do your search and you say, all right, I've got a hold, you can also put items on legal hold. So you've got data custodians or data sources you want to put on hold. You put that data source on a hold. Anything that gets deleted on there will be stuck in a recoverable item state. So it won't get purged out of the environment. It'll always be available on a legal hold until such time that you pull it off legal hold. So you can manually add users or groups into a legal hold, but then when you want to remove users, you got to remove the individuals. When you add a group in, it's not dynamic. You add the group in. Anybody that's part of that group at that moment in time will get added to the legal hold. But when you remove the users out, you got to remove the users out from an individual basis, right? So it doesn't maintain the group membership as you add people in and out of the group from a hold perspective. So again, legal hold is one of the key features there that you can put in place from an eDiscovery standpoint. And then obviously you've got your search capabilities as well, right? So when you're going into a search situation here, some of the key ways to effectively search are, I said, across mailboxes, SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams, Copilot, et cetera. You can explore data using various custodian sources. You can target all of Exchange Online. You can target all of SharePoint, et cetera. You can target to specific mailboxes, specific sites and locations as well. Search for cloud attachments as well. And then there's also we call the KeyQL, right? The keyword query language. That allows you to get really, really complex searches going, allow you to do query and string-based searches. But what's also nice is there are specific elements that kind of tie back to the rest of Purview. So when you start building things like sensitivity labels and information protection, or you've got sensitive info types within information protection, those are items that you can actually do content searches for as well, and elements. Even retention labels can be searched for, within eDiscovery. So there are 28 different conditions that you can leverage within your eDiscovery searches, right? There's 11 common ones, which are basically things like date, author, the subject, retention, et cetera. You got specific keywords you can leverage. You start getting into Exchange Online, you start getting to sender, to, from, those types of things. SharePoint, OneDrive gets into more of the properties within those locations. Sensitivity labels, sensitive info types, as I mentioned, retention labels come into play that you can search off of. But then what I wanted to highlight here is also within the KeyQL, that keyword query language. This is where you can use things like there's a property called kind, which allows you to search for key elements such as Teams messages, chat messages. You can look for AI prompts using the keyword query language. It allows you to get into some of those advanced features and finds, building keyword queries and strings. There's definitely there's pre-built documentation from Microsoft that shows you what the queries are, how to build those strings. It's not too difficult to kind of work with. It's a pretty simple, simplistic language to get in there and learn to build common queries with. But it can be very powerful, very effective when you want to do some advanced searches beyond just by the individual or by like the date and time, et cetera. You can get pretty granular on your search criteria. Okay. And then this is probably one of the slides I was excited to share with people the most here. So not everybody's aware of this, but when you're storing information about certain things, I don't think everybody realizes how much data is actually stored within your Exchange online mailbox. There's a set of hidden folders in each mailbox that is used specifically to store your one-to-one chat messages, one-to-many chat messages. And then you got channel messages, which are stored within the group mailboxes, et cetera. You've got the channel messages that are also stored there. But you have to know when you're doing a search and when you're doing retention based, that, hey, this is where the data is stored. So if you're doing onboarding and offboarding policies, understand, what are you doing with your Exchange mailboxes when somebody's leaving the organization? If something is on hold, make sure you realize that, yes, we need to hold on to these mailboxes for search capabilities. I mean, they'll still be there from a retention standpoint, right? They'll just be invisible to the user. If somebody was put on a hold or retention, it's not going to get purged out. The mailbox will stay around until the retention is gone. But know that these Exchange hidden folders is where a lot of your data is sourced. Even your AI, your Copilot chats, your prompts, and your responses. This is where the data physically is stored at. If you're running in an Exchange hybrid environment as well, where you've got Exchange on premise and you're using Exchange mailboxes, if you've got a user that's got an on-prem mailbox and they're using Teams for chat and they're using Copilot, et cetera, they still technically have an Exchange Online mailbox that are leveraging these hidden folders. It's just not visible to the user, but this is where the data is stored. So there was a change back in September 25 as well that moved where the private channel messages were at. So that's something to be aware of, where it moved the private channel messages from the members Exchange Online mailbox to the group mailbox. So if you're doing searches across that time frame, the before and after that September 2025 window, you have to be able to do the search. You want to do the search across both criteria as well to make sure you're doing the search properly. But knowing where this data resides and how you treat it from an onboarding and offboarding perspective, and how you're treating it from a retention perspective is one of those things that you need to be aware of from an IT management perspective, right? So this also gets into the hold of, if you've got retention policies being triggered from multiple spots, know how this could impact how long you retain your data for. Okay. Heather, I think this is where you pick things back up to talk about some of the advanced features. Once you get past the search criteria and the setup, and once you get past that, what do you do with it? Heather, I'll let you take it from here.
Cool, thank you. I'm actually going to go back real quick because one thing I do want to mention on this slide, especially coming from a highly regulated industry that has some requirements around retention and supervision of communications. This slide is super important because we do have some different connectors. We'll talk a little bit about APIs at the very end, not super deep, but just talk a little bit about some of the integrations. But if you're bringing in data from other sources, if you're integrating some of our policies with different third-party AI, you can bring in prompts and responses from different other AI tools. So, what we're finding, especially on the AI side, is, people are using a mix of different tools to develop different models. All of that is brought in is going to follow what Jeff said. So prompts and responses will still be kept in user mailboxes. If you're bringing in communications from other tools, Slack, whatever, as part of your eDiscovery process, that is all going to come into user mailboxes as well. So I think that's something to just be aware of, is as your universe continues to grow, as far as the tools that you're using, what you're collecting, regulations, it's good to know where that is stored. And then also, we really do focus on the eDiscovery side on the Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive. So there's a lot of good information in there. So before I move on to Enrich, I did see that we have a couple of questions, and they relate to, one is licensing, the other two are kind of around retention. So I wanted to answer those before we move on. The first one is, what are the licensing requirements required between Office 365 E3 E5 and M365 E3 E5? So we do have different licensing structures, and this is something that we could spend an entire day on talking about licensing, depending on the type of organization you are, if you're government or if you're in enterprise. We do have, beyond just E3, E5, other options in licensing. So we have Office and full Microsoft. From the eDiscovery perspective, whether you have Office E3 or Microsoft E3, the ability, like the features that you have in eDiscovery are the same. Now, there are other functionalities that will be different, especially around some of the security features. So it is just something to be aware of in understanding what you get with an Office license as compared to E5. We can dig deeper into that on your specific case if you want to. Definitely for deep licensing questions, reach out to Netrix or reach out to Microsoft, and we can have those discussions to make sure that your licensing is really working for what you're trying to do. The other two are around retaining Copilot data. How long do most organizations retain, and why would you want to retain? As far as how long, I think that right now there isn't an actual standard out there, and I think it's like that for a lot of data retention. Every organization has their own retention schedule, as well as any regulations that they are dealing with. So I know for the AI piece, again, like I mentioned earlier, what is the intention of the AI tool that you're using? If it is something that is more communications based, you may be running into some different regulations around communications that require you to retain longer or for a certain period. I think that will probably get some regulations coming up that may have more requirements around retention. I think a lot of organizations are currently just in this place of trying to figure out how much data, what kind of data AI usage inside of their organization is really going to create. So it's something that's so new for a lot of us.
Yeah, and I think to add on that, it's what they're searching for, how they're using AI is also going to drive that too, right? Because if you're doing web searches versus doing searches against content in your environment through a Microsoft 365 Copilot versus using general AI, that's a very open-ended question in terms of it's going to depend on by company, regulation by regulation, right? So I think there's definitely. We also just got another question in as well regarding how can they be sure about searching for all areas a user has? Is there a backend setting to toggle this on or off, or is there somewhere in Purview the person that's doing the search can check to be sure I'm getting both their online mailbox and private channel? When you actually kick off the search, you can target your data custodians. You can target their entire Exchange mailbox and all their OneDrive accounts, right? So you're going to be searching across those two areas. for that information, Kia. So that's that's the search way. So make sure you target the custodian within your search criteria, and then your chat messages and things like that. When you do a search, if you want to target specific chat messages or AI prompts versus just email messages, by targeting the Exchange mailbox on your search, you can kind of fine tune what within that mailbox you're actually searching for from an eDiscovery standpoint. That's why it's important to know that, yes, chat messages and AI prompts, stuff like that, are contained within the Exchange mailbox, because that's going to be your target location. So when you target your search to that custodian, you're bringing those items into scope, and it's just a matter of how you're filtering your conditions when you do the search to look for what you want to look for.
Yeah, and I will add to this that there's the searching piece, but there's also the understanding the users, where they're collaborating, what kind of work they're doing. I have discussions all the time. I want everything this user has access to, they have done since they've been here, every document. And, I there's that fear of missing out on something there. But at the same time, I look at the teams that I have access to. I went in today and looked in our Microsoft demo environment at the agents I have access to, and it's many, many, many hundreds. So retaining all of the information, or putting all of the information that I have access to on legal hold, is just going to be huge. And if you, multiply that by all of your users that would be on legal hold or need to be searched, that's just an enormous amount of information. So that's really where you're looking at, your data map, what tools are being used, what's producing data, and really, what kind of risk does it pose, relevance, and proportionality as well. So there's some strategy there. And there are, Netrix is great at helping walk through some of that strategy. But, there's can something be done technically? Yes. Should it be? You'll eventually wind up putting your entire tenant on legal hold, and your searches will just take a while because it's a lot of data. So it really is kind of looking at that strategy. So I'm going to move on to the enrich piece for time's sake. So we say enrich. This is, I would say, here we say enrich, but this is determining, after you run searches, what do you want to do with your data? I have a separate slide that we'll look at for export. But one thing you can do after you run your search, and if you have just E3, it's the only thing you'll be able to do after you run a search, other than look at some reports, is do an export. So you can export directly from search within eDiscovery. If you have E5, you'll have some options. You can definitely export, but you'll have some different enrichment options. Basically, this is sending data from your search to a review set. And what this process is going to do is take it from your live environment. So the live M365 environment, where people are working on, this data, and it's live data, and it's copying it to a review set. It's extracting emails, attachments, all the different pieces of the data. It's extracting some additional metadata. And then you have some different options, such as threading contextual conversations. So if you're using something like Copilot Chat, it's threading a chat within a Copilot Chat session. It's threading Teams conversations. You can do holds. We talked a little bit about holds. You can do holds right from a search. I have feelings about, just from a perspective of process, doing complex queries and putting that data on hold, but you can do a hold just from a search. So we're going to put on hold or preserve just that data. We also will give you options for different versions. So depending on what your version settings are in SharePoint, you'll be able to determine what version of the document. There's also a retention policy, where if you are collaborating and you're sharing in Teams, or you're sharing something from OneDrive in an email, it will retain the version that was shared. So lots of different options on, getting the most out of your data. And then this goes with the threaded contextual conversation is if you do that threading, you'll get conversation transcripts. So you'll get HTML files, which just makes it easier than trying to put back together a bunch of separate email messages that come out of Exchange. So that process will also do some advanced indexing. So this gets it into the review set, which is the next phase. Now, when we say review here, this is, we can do some review inside of a review set. Most large litigation, you're going to have a separate review tool that is going to have features and be focused just on that. So, I don't necessarily recommend this to do like a full-blown review, but the review set inside of Purview is a great place to do some advanced filtering, do some validation before you export. I've used this a lot in investigations where, we're just looking for some documents in an internal investigation. So we're going to put it in a review set, and then we're going to give the attorney or the investigator access to just those documents. We also have the ability to have guest access. So bringing in outside counsel or bringing someone in from outside of your tenant or organization, maybe an expert witness, where you're giving them access to just what they're looking for. They can come in, look at the documents. You don't have to worry about going through an export process. But once we get into review, like I said, this is a great place where you can do some additional filtering because we have some additional metadata that we didn't have in the initial search because we did some extraction and made a copy. So this might be where you do some advanced filtering to look to get rid of, I don't want to say junk domains, but junk email messages. So you can go in and filter out everything from ESPN or whatever news organization somebody's getting their daily mail from in their Outlook email inbox. There are different analytics that will run through and do some analysis on your data set. And this is something that there's some different settings here that you can adjust, but I definitely recommend to get the most out of your process of review here to run those analytics. This will give you additional OCR. This will identify near duplicates, also do some email threading. And you can also pick up themes. I look at this kind of like concept clustering. So those of us that have been around in the eDiscovery world longer than a lot of us would like to admit, remember some of the old clustering tools that were out there where it puts concepts together. So nouns, noun phrases. This is very similar to that where it will give you those themes. It will allow you to sort and filter by all of the data that it collects through the analytics process. So the analytics process will populate some metadata fields that will allow you to sort, organize, filter. And then from there, we have the KeyQL searching, as well as metadata filters, and then you'll be able to tag. So, it's a great way to be able to say, I don't want to export this. This is junk. I'm going to tag it, or I do want to export. So review sets are a great way to get that additional filtering, that organization before you just go and do a full export. So we also have some new features that I'll just bring up here. It did not make it into this deck, but we do have a dashboard with some really great visuals on search results as well as what's going into a review set. And then we'll have an advanced KeyQL search for a review set. Both of those are in preview. I believe that they're set for GA, so they're set to be released to everyone not in preview over the coming months.
And just to add into that, Heather, so from a search standpoint and from a review, you can actually do queries using Security Copilot as well. So you can do natural language queries as well, which comes into play on some of the stuff as well. So,
yeah, that's actually a good point. Anybody that does have E5 licenses. I think it's coming out, I want to say May 1st. I should know this, but I believe it's May 1st, where if your organization has E5, you will have access to Security Copilot. And part of Security Copilot is natural language searching, as well as using AI to summarize data in the review set. So your documents in the review set. So that's using AI for eDiscovery. This slide here is what eDiscovery for AI would look like. So if you're collecting, this actually looks very similar to Teams, but if you're collecting interactions, so input, output, prompt response from AI, we're going to thread that in the review set and have it in an HTML format that will make it easy for you to review and to export. So the next step is export. Like I said, you can export directly from a search. You're not going to have quite as many options there. You can also export from a review set. From here with a review set, you'll be able to set filters. So maybe you don't want to export all of that junk email. If you tag it, you can set a filter to not export that anything with that tagged document. You can export any tags as well as reports. And then you'll have some different export format options. So we can export PSTs. We can also export native files, text, and some reports that can be used for like a load file. A lot of times what we find is, once this is exported, it is going into either a full-blown production tool. It is going into a downstream process, or I used to do a lot with internal investigations. We would actually just take the PST, because it was typically like 20, 30 emails, and we would just convert it to a PDF portfolio. And then throughout all of this, everything is audited in the M365 audit log. So you'll have those auditable events. So one thing that I mentioned earlier was some of the different integrations that we have. We do have some different data connectors. Like I said, I know some banks and financial institutions have regulations around those data connectors, and that will bring data in from different sources. But we also have integrations through Graph API, and I'm not going to get technical with this, but a lot of times, especially on the hold piece, organizations are using like a third-party tool for legal holds, where they'll place the holds, they'll do their communications, but on the back end, it's actually placing the hold in the M365 environment. That integration is done through Graph API. So a lot of the integrations that you'll see with other tools, whether it's hold, whether it's some of the review production tools, are created through APIs. If you have developers, this is a great place that you can do some automation on your own. So APIs are open for you to automate common processes, repeatable, predictable. So this could be a place where maybe you automate like an export or something like that. So when it comes to the APIs, let us know if you have questions, anything like that, and we can do a deeper dive on that. But I think as we kind of progress down the road of AI, the need for that that customization and that automation is going to become more and more important.
Yeah, I mean, the APIs can be leveraged through things like Power Apps, Logic Apps, those type of things. So custom development using these APIs can be a very powerful thing to maybe think outside of the box and maybe fit a solution in place that maybe you that you don't have through a third party, that maybe you want to tie into a third party. So there's definitely some unique things that you can do with the APIs and OAuth and for access and stuff like that. So can be very powerful.
Yeah, and Jessica, who is out there watching, who is a fellow data security solutions engineer, just posted for Security Copilot. It is included with ME5. It is starting to roll out now and will roll out through July right now. So it is something that you should hopefully be seeing in your tenant soon. I think for eDiscovery, I think Security Copilot is super useful for a lot of different things in Purview. I think for eDiscovery, the natural language searching, as well as the ability to summarize documents is really great. So key takeaways, I think we went over a lot. I think one of the big key takeaways that I want people to leave with is I'm definitely seeing a demand more for that collaboration between legal, IT, security, GRC, business units to come together, understand the entire ecosystem. So understand, what are retention policies for your organization? How is your data being labeled? How is sensitive data being handled? And doing those regular reviews. So whether you do that through a steering committee, whether you do that organically, there are a lot of different ways that can be handled. But I definitely, encourage legal to have a seat at the table during those discussions, and the sooner the better, so you're not cut out of those discussions. But I think that alignment is critical. And then building those defensible processes, especially as the AI adoption picks up, and just understanding all of the different pieces as far as how your organization is governing AI and how they're using it. And then just continue to test, understand, keep up on all of the different updates, keep it documented. And then, like I said, I'm sure everybody is keeping up with all of the fun AI case law that is out there. So anything to add, Jeff?
Yeah, a couple of key things. Number one, know your retention policies, or know your customers' retention policies, right? Make sure what's being enforced is matching up to what's written in those retention policies. That can be a lifesaver. And then, I can't tell you how many times I go into a Purview implementation, and they're rolling out things like sensitivity labels, and they're going down this road, and they're not maybe discussing everything with legal. So if you hear that you're talking about labeling and data classification, which are all great things that companies should be doing nowadays to protect and provide data governance, legal is such a key part of that, right? You got to make sure that we're addressing the risks properly, and things like data classification, sensitivity labels, those are foundational Purview things. Some of the first things that go in place that feed into eDiscovery that set you up for success there for things like searching and identifying potential risks. So when you hear that you're going down the data governance route, make sure that you've got your retention policies in order, make sure that they're getting enforced properly within Purview. And then we start getting into labeling, whether it be for retention or sensitivity labeling, make sure that the business units and the legal is specifically represented to make sure risks are properly addressed.
Thank you, Jeff. It looks like we only have a couple minutes left, so I did want to bring up this slide that we have here, which is focused around some different workshops that we have, as well as, if you're not using Purview, there are some things we can do to get you a trial. So Microsoft is here to support you on looking at Purview, looking at eDiscovery. And then as well, Netrix is here as well. So Netrix can offer workshops, they can offer assessments, especially around AI readiness and security. So definitely reach out to Netrix and have them help you. Have them use their experience, their tools, their assessments to help you through this process. So you're definitely not in it alone. And yeah, if you need anything, reach out to either Microsoft or Netrix.
Yeah, and even if you want to get more details on things like the licensing breakdowns, like I said, getting involved with some workshops, it gives you a chance to really kind of dig into the features, play around in a sandbox type environment to learn things. We can help provide some guided tours and some guidance on that as you progress down that path for whether it be eDiscovery or Purview in general. So.
Cool. Well, I think that's it. Thank you, everyone, for your time today, and hopefully we'll be speaking again soon.
Okay.